Hello, and welcome to the Viking Home Companion with another episode from the good old days. Now, this story is going to involve the West Antir War again, and it's actually the last time that I ever attended a West Antir War before I moved away from the West back here to first Mid-Realm and then Ethelmark, where I currently reside. It also involves Duke Radnor of Gildemar, and the last time that he was king of the West. Now, this war took place in Wairika, California, and I was the only one of the fighters from the barony of Vinhold to make it up there that year, which still held with the tradition of the Vinhold war junkies that no matter where a war was taking place, at least one of us would be there. So I made it up there and didn't have a unit to fight with. And so I went over to see my friend, Duke Rolf the Relentless. Now, Rolf was the head of Tribe Rockmana, and they had a fairly good turnout for that war, at least half a dozen or so guys. And so I asked if I could run around with them for the day. I had before, I didn't figure it'd be a problem. But he said, hey, wait a minute, I got an idea. And so he takes off and comes back a few minutes later with His Majesty in tow, King Radnor. And he says, Your Majesty, Torvald doesn't have anybody to fight with today, so I thought maybe he could run around with you. And His Majesty said, oh yes, absolutely, of course, Torvald, we'd be glad to have you along. And said, well, thank you, Your Majesty, for the honor. I will be very happy to run around as part of your guard. Well, that turned out to be kind of a two-edged sword. Yes, I was very happy and very honored to be part of His Majesty's guard, but His Majesty shared a certain trait with my former knight, Sir Joffrey of Griffinhold. It had become cliche within the Vinhold War Junkies unit that Joffrey had a habit of doing two things. The first was that even when he was in command of the unit, that he would often use this phrase, wait here, I'll be right back. At which point, he would trot off on his own, ostensibly to scout something out and take a look. The reality is that he would manage to get himself killed, at which point we would pick somebody else to be in command and go off and do our own thing. Well, we did kind of get him back for that. Although, unfortunately, I was not present at the time that the unit decided to teach him a lesson. It took place at a Mist-Sanaga war, and Vinhold was fighting with the Mists. Although, the thing about Vinhold is you have to understand, the barony of Vinhold is Napa, California, Napa County, but also includes parts of Sonoma County and Solano County, and it's one of the northernmost areas in the Principality of the Mists across the Carquinez Straits. And often during a Mist-Sanaga war, if the sides were out of balance, Vinhold would be kind of a switch hitter. They would fight for whichever group needed to have the numbers evened up. And so it was not uncommon for Vinhold to fight on the Sanaguan side against the Mists. But at this particular war, they were still fighting with the Mists. And the Mists had the high ground at the top of this hill looking down at the Sanaguan line. And the entire unit turned and looked at Joffrey and says, wait here, we'll be right back. And ran down the hill, charging the Sanaguan line. Now, the kicker to this whole thing is that as they're running down the hill, they have no intention of fighting. They have no intention of actually hitting the Sanaguan line and fighting them. They run down the hill with their swords and shields up in the air, screaming, going, ah! And they run right through the Sanaguan line and nobody hits them. So they turn around and they run back through the Sanaguan line, still with their swords and shields in the air going, ah! And nobody hits them. So they turn back around again and they go up and they lean on people, pushing them, until somebody finally hits them and kills them. At which point they all trot back up and grin at Joffrey. I wish I could have been there for that. Oh man, that would have been a blast. But the other habit that Joffrey had was that even when he was in command, he would often fight with sword and board, and instead of staying behind the line in the command position, he would float out to the end of the line, and then he would often spot something that he wanted the unit to charge at, either an exposed flank or a gap in the line or whatever, and he would yell charge. The only thing is, he would be about 2 or 3 steps ahead of the unit before he actually managed to get the word charge out, and we would all be playing catch-up to try to get to him and wherever it is he wanted us to go. So often he would get there first because Joffrey was tall, lanky, and ran very fast, and not all of us were tall and lanky and could run very fast. So he would often end up getting himself killed again. Well, Radnor wouldn't pull the wait here, I'll be right back bit. But what he would do to us is, we as the guard, of course, are taking a position in front of him to protect him from any missile or thrown weapons, and to, of course, intercept any heavy fighters that try to get to him. And he had this habit of seeing something going on somewhere else and just trotting off on his own, which wouldn't be such a big deal per se if he was just the commander of a unit, but a whole lot of a bigger deal since he was the king. So after a couple of times of him doing that and getting himself killed without any of the rest of us, his royal guard, knowing what was going on, we finally started stationing someone back there next to or behind him that would then tell the unit whenever the king decided to take off. So the situation that this story involves is during one of the castle battles. And it was one where the West was inside the castle. Now, the way this castle had been set up, it actually had plywood walls, not hay bales, as was customary many times. There were some few groups, Vinhold included, that had made walls out of plywood and 2x4s and had a way of connecting them together to make castles. So they had this type of thing up there at the West Antir War. And they had made the castle with actually a very good defensive configuration in that the outer walls came forward, but instead of actually having a gate right here, the walls then turned in and went in about 10 to 15 feet, and that was where the gate was. So essentially you had a killing pocket to anyone who tried to get into the castle. What ended up happening, though, was after 1 or 2 attempts by anybody to blast their way down through that killing pocket, very often now nobody would actually attack the gate outright. The fighting all took place around the walls until numbers were whittled down enough that they felt confident in charging down that killing lane. So the West is in the castle. The king's unit is back and to the right of the gate, and if memory serves, the unit that was right in the gate defending it was Griffin's Guard, which for many, many years was the premier heavy infantry unit of the West. I mean, they had really big kite shields. They were all pretty big guys, heavily armored, and they basically were like the sea cliff that you could hammer on forever. They would just button up and let you pound away. Vinhold was much more of a shock unit and a skirmish unit. We were really good going cowboy, as the phrase was, rampaging around, but we were also really good at forming a flying wedge and blasting through a heavy unit. Some of the meetings between Griffin's Guard and Vinhold are themselves epic, and I will try and put some stories together about that later. But Vinhold did have a habit of being able to blast through the Griffin Guard line on occasion. So at any rate, Griffin's Guard is holding the gate. The Antirans are not trying to push their way in. And I'm standing on the left end of the guard line, and there's about 7 or 8 of us. We're a decent-sized small unit. And His Majesty decides to take off to the gate. Now, the guy in the back warns us all that he's taking off, and we turn and start trying to chase after him. And I'm the only one that can manage to keep up with him, not because I'm tall, lanky, and fast, because I'm not any of those things, but because I was on the end of the line closest to where he was going. Everybody else is having a problem getting through the crowd of people and fighters to get over there. And to make matters worse, once we get to the gate, the king doesn't stop. He didn't go over there to take command of the gate. He actually ran through Griffin's guard, into the killing pocket, and out to the end, and stopped at the end of the lane on the left-hand side where the lane and the outer wall connect, and starts engaging a unit out there by himself. Now, I managed to keep up with him, like I said. I was a few steps behind him, and I'm yelling the whole time we're running down that lane, which is about, like I say, about 15 feet long, and I'm yelling, "Rally to the king! Rally to the king!" And nobody moved. Griffin's guard stayed back there in the gate, didn't budge. I don't know why. The rest of the guardsmen are still trying to get their way through the crowd to get up there. And so the king is engaged over here, and I'm on his right, and I've tried to defend him from about 4 people. I've got a shield man right in front of me. I got a great axeman backing him up. Next to him is a pikeman with a 9-foot spear. And then right here, I've got another shield man. And so I'm swatting with my shield over in front of the shield man who's trying to swing on the king, while I am simultaneously swatting at the great axe and the spearman with my sword to prevent them from getting a shot in. And I, of course, still have another shieldman over here who's taking the occasional swing at me that I am trying to dodge. So I am just flailing around with all of my weapons, still yelling at the top of my lungs for somebody to get out here and help defend the king, at which point the spearman finally gets through, kills the king, he falls over, and about 3 or 4 seconds after that, I die. I get clubbed by the great axeman and go down. Now, this turned out to be the last battle for me that day, because I was just wore out. It's Wairika in July, it's bloody hot. I have been doing a lot more running around than I am used to while fighting in a war, trying to keep up with His Majesty. And of course, that last little bit was very energetic. So I go over to His Majesty, and I thank him for the honor of having been allowed to be part of his guard for the day. And he thanked me back, and I said, "However, I would like to ask one favor of you." And he goes, "Oh, of course, Torvald, anything." And I said, "Do you think next time that you could contrive to live about another 10 seconds? And he looked at me and he said, "Why?" And I said, "Because, Your Majesty, it is unseemly of a guardsman to die after the king that he is there to protect." And the entire guard busted up laughing, and His Majesty looked a little sheepish, and then he started laughing and said, "Of course, Torvald, I'll do my best." And so that was the last West Antir that I ever fought in. And I still had a pretty good time, but had the good story to tell with a laugh at His Majesty's expense. Yeah, sure, you betcha.